Hey guys, it's Adam from Pixel and welcome back. Now I already had other videos planned for today. I've already recorded them. But I've had enough conversations with loved ones and with friends and with students lately that I think it's time to talk about this instead. I think it would do all of us a little bit more good to step away from talking art for a moment and talk about us as humans. Talk about our feelings and share with you my thoughts and feelings on a topic that is most likely impacting your life, because it's impacting everybody's life worldwide. And that's this extended period of being locked up, this extended period of uncertainty, this extended period of the virus that we're dealing with. And I want to share with you what I feel about it, and I want to share with you and reflect on some of my life's experiences and how that relates to this, and maybe offer you some thought, something to think about with regards to this. Now, before I continue, I'm going to make it extremely clear, because I get a lot of private messages about this. I am not a doctor. I've got zero experience as a clinical psychologist, counselor, psychiatrist, any of the like. I'm not a scientist. I'm not even a veterinarian or a dentist. I'm an art teacher. I'm a dad. I'm a single human being, and I'm no more human than you are human in that regard. So I can and will not, in fact, I flat out refuse to offer professional advice. Okay? Now, why am I mentioning this? Because I'm mentioning this because I care. I'm mentioning this because of the nature of the types of videos that I produce, that are comforting, that are meditative, that are thoughtful, that are introspective, and yes, they are somewhat philosophical and psychological in a more broad sense of the word. People do very often reach out to me and do ask me for advice or feedback on subjects I am just not at all qualified. Personal subjects, they ask me advice on clinical issues such as depression, schizophrenia, or family issues, or heavy levels of anxiety and self-doubt. Those types of things, when I do get emails and messages like that, I very respectably decline. Because if I was to offer any advice, even if I thought, well, it's not a big deal, it's not, I can offer some feedback on that. If I did, I'm doing several things, I'm making several mistakes all at the same time. The first of which is taking for granted the complexity of that person's unique situation. One of the very big mistakes that a lot of people make, and I'm sure I've made this a million times growing up, is comparing somebody else's situation to your own. Is saying, well, I've been through something like this, so it kind of reminds me of what you're going through, and therefore this is what helped me get through my situation. But when I'm dealing with somebody, when I'm speaking to somebody that I know is going through something far more serious than just a bad time, quote unquote, then that same advice could be very damaging, very dangerous for that other person. I don't play Russian roulette with the well-being of you. I just don't. I care too much for that kind of stuff. So I turn down the request for advice on stuff like that. So with that said, what can I offer? Why am I here? What does my channel represent to me? And what role do I feel comfortable playing? I consider myself, and I consider these videos, in a sense, an extension of the types of things, the types of videos I love to listen to when I need to bring my inner clock down to speed, when I try to regulate my own clock to a certain degree, when I feel like there's a lot going on. I'm a dad, I've got 3 kids, I've got all these different responsibilities, and I'm running a school, and I'm making videos, and I just need to bring myself back to home base. And there's certain YouTubers, it can be a multitude of different types of things. It can be from Minecraft streamers to Vatividya to science shows to anything that are astrophysics. I love listening to that kind of stuff as well. Let me know. A Swedish guy who does all these kind of mini documentaries. People who have kind of these relaxing energies to them that I can just have playing in the background. And that's kind of what I like to do myself. I want to want you to have me playing in the background. I want you to, I don't even care if you look at the screen. I just want you to be able to relax and get into your own zone, think about your own thoughts. And I don't want my videos to be a distraction. I don't want to change your energy. I want to help you to realign it in that sense. So that's what these are, first and foremost, before anything else. And if you find any wisdom, if you find any comfort, if you find anything to reflect on in yourself, wonderful. Then that's what I'm there for too. Okay? So what am I here to talk about today? Why am I making this video? I'm making it because I've been hit from multiple different angles from a multitude of different people, from close friends of mine to loved ones to friends to acquaintances to students to people reaching out to me, expressing a very, very ever-growing issue. This feeling of overwhelm, this feeling of being on the brink, an emotional brink, where this person that I'm speaking to has been trying to keep a positive attitude about something that is carrying on a little bit too long, and they're feeling overwhelmed. And in most part, this overwhelm is an overwhelm that these people might not be familiar to the level that they are, because this is a situation, aka these lockdowns and COVID and these restrictions and all these conditions, these changes to our lifestyle, has been dragging on longer than we really planned it for. Most people said it was only going to last a few months, and here we are well over a year later, still dealing with this. And we're starting to realize just how long a year and a half something like this can feel like, when it's something that forces you to go against your grain, something that's forcing you to live in a state of discomfort, an extended period of discomfort. In a world, in a society that for many of us have taken for granted. And what do I mean by taken for granted? I mean, a lot of these creature comforts that we're used to today, a lot of these creature comforts that we've gotten used to in modern day society, access to amenities, shops anywhere you can go, restaurants you can drop in on a dime, stores, resources, friends you can drop in on, just going to concerts, all of these different things that we're so used to doing where we gather up as big groups of people together. All of a sudden we can't. Not being able to see people face to face. Having to live our lives, having to go to school virtually, not leaving your home, stuck in your room day after day, leaving your house for very short periods of time, going grocery shopping, doing so with a mask, keeping distance from other people, coming home, having to put disinfectant on your hands every single time you walk in and out of a store. God forbid you go shopping, you have to do it 7 times in a row. This feeling of isolation, this feeling of alienation, this feeling of loneliness. It's very lonely. It can feel very lonely. And depending on what lifestyle you're living, depending on what you're doing with your life, it can impact some of us far more than others. What overwhelms me and what exhausts me and what really preoccupies me is how everybody around me is impacted. And I'm a very strong believer in the fact that it's harder to watch your loved ones hurt than it is to hurt yourself. I could stand on hot coals for a week if I was done willfully to me. If it was my choice, I could do that. But when I see somebody that I care for suffer, it's much harder because I want to help them. I want to do something about it. And when I don't know what to do to help somebody else through their difficulties and through their suffering, I suffer twice as hard because my imagination plays a very big role in this as well. And I can I can over or under emphasize what they're going through. I can't predict what they're thinking. I can't quite gauge just how badly it's impacting them. And I fear the worst. And when people reach out to me, and when I hear, when I hear the stories of loved ones and friends and, people, listeners and stuff like that, when I hear the difficulties that they go through, what's hard for me is I want to be there for everybody. I'm sure you do. I'm sure you know that feeling. You want to be there. You want to be the magic pill for everybody, but you're only one person. And you can at best manage 1 or 2 people a day substantially, responsibly. That's where professionals come in, right? And I think that the world needs more professionals. I think the world needs more doctors and psychologists and counselors. I think more of, at least of quality. There's a lot of crappy ones out there too. But from my experience, one of the things that I learned, and one of the things that I had to realize, and you can only realize this through experience, is hard times, true difficulty is not so much a difficulty of the pain itself. It's not the initial act that hurts. It's the prolonged aching pain that follows after that. It's the everyday side of it. And to me, when I went through my hardest times, when I went through my hardest periods in my life, really crappy things happened. But it wasn't the really crappy things that had the worst impact on me, on my mental and physical and medical health. That's not what impacted me the most. It was when, unbeknownst to me, it lasted years. It didn't last days or weeks. It lasted years. It became a lifestyle. It became a holy shit, how long is this going to last? I already feel like I've hit rock bottom. And you're still punching me. Life is still kicking me in the ass. And I don't feel I have anything left. And I've described this in the past. I've described this in videos in the past where it's then and there that your survival instinct kicks in. And survival is a much different beast than just enduring temporary pain. And I can attribute this reality, I can attribute this realization that we have to many different things. I can attribute to, for instance, watching the survival guy, the guy, what's his name, who does all the survival videos. He says, when you're in a real survival situation, real survival is not sleeping for days because it's too damn cold, because your priority is to keep yourself warm. Your priority is to keep that fire burning, because if you don't get that fire burning, you're going to freeze to death. Survival is not eating for 5 days and trying to decide what's more of a priority for me, eating or drinking. Survival is knowing, what do I really, if I had 15 survival tools in front of me, which 2 would I grab first? Which ones matter most? And learning through experience, learning through facing life or death, what hurts more? This or that, and grabbing that tool that will get you through that night. That's real survival. And when you find yourself in a state of emotional exhaustion, but emotional exhaustion where you expected to be hypothetically, symbolically dead months ago, but here you are still going on, that's when you realize who your true self is. And I've described it in the past as an incredibly painful thing to go through. An incredibly difficult, exhausting, painful thing to go through. But also an incredible teaching tool. It's an incredible tool for teaching you who you are. What your real character is. And in order to find what your real character is, you have to have every other management tool, not survival tool, but management tool destroyed. You have the ego gone. That's not going to get you over. Now everybody sees you with your pants off. Everybody sees you in your most vulnerable, ugly, imperfect state. You've already shown your true self. There's no reason to get yourself dressed up and put makeup on now. No reason to brush your hair anymore. I'm speaking symbolically, of course. We already know what you look like. So you can drop that facade. Get rid of your ego. Your wit, your perseverance, your strength of character. All of these things that might help you to manage day-to-day life, to navigate day-to-day life, become pretty much obsolete. I could compare this directly to the ice storm that western, eastern Canada experienced and parts of northeast US experienced back during the ice storm, where the electricity was cut out. No power, no electricity, and a 1.5 feet of slippery, hard, heavy ice outside that was tearing everything apart for weeks or sometimes months. You realize that the moment that electricity, this life-sustaining resource that we have, when that's gone, we're back in the Stone Ages instantly. And your cell phones and your cars and your hot water and your refrigerators, none of that matters. Your light bulbs, your toasters, your lamps, your microphones, your television screens, all of that is garbage. It's a heap of plastic garbage. None of that matters. All of a sudden you start to realize, I need heat. I need food. I need to keep my food fresh. I need light. But all of those resources are things you're going to have to make yourself. You realize that you're right back down to the fundamentals of survival again. It's the same thing. Your emotional resources are the same thing. You can rely on your emotional resources superficially, temporarily, when you're meeting somebody and walking down the street. But what happens when all of those emotional resources have been exhausted and you're still exactly in the same shit you were a 1.5 years ago? And now you're tired. Now you've endured the test of time. Where are you now? And that's what I'm starting to experience. That's what I'm starting to hear people describe. People who are on the brink of tears. All you have to say is the word cry. And they'll cry. They'll bawl without any acting training. It comes out of them fully, and it comes out of them wholeheartedly. And there's nowhere to go. There's no sign of, there's no light. There's no sign of solace. There's no hero who's bursting in through your door and saying, everything's fixed. So what do we do? What do we do in times like this? A lot of us depend on leadership. Depend on our presidents or our prime ministers or our doctors or anybody. We rely on leadership to let us know what to do, when to do it, how to behave, where to go, where not to go. So at a time of real survival, we'll be sitting there by the television screen waiting for our leader to say, go to school, don't go to school, go shop, don't go shop. You can go out, don't go out, travel, no, you can't travel. And if there's even a shred of inconsistency, if there's a shred of incompetence in their leadership skills, and remember, how people interpret leadership skills is entirely subjective, depending on your own personal perspective. You might feel comforted, you might feel secured, you might feel a sense of some type of normalcy, knowing that, okay, we're in a lockdown, but it's going to last this long. There's a timeline, there's an expectation, there's something I can plan around. Or you can completely lose your trust in them. And which a lot of people do is they rebel, they deny, they act unlawfully, they put other people at risk because they're grabbing at straws to salvage, to maintain what shred of management tools they have at their disposal. Not survival tools, management tools. Because somebody who denies science, somebody who says, I don't need to wear a mask, somebody who says, yeah, I know we're not allowed to go near people, but I'm going to throw house parties. Doesn't really matter. People who do that are trying to manage. They're not trying to survive. They're trying to manage, because a survivalist would say, I could die from doing this. A survivalist is thinking in the long term. They're not thinking in the short term. They're thinking in the long term. And they also know, a real survivalist knows that if you have access to other human beings, that is the most important resource you could ever have. Survival depends on others, on the survival and the health and well-being of everybody in your community, everybody in your surrounding. Any survivalist will tell you that. So if you don't respect your neighbor, if you're not there to take care of the person that's there with you, your chances of survival dwindle very fast. The most valuable survival tool out there is your fellow human being, your neighbors, your community. Ask any survivalist on this planet. Ask anybody. I guarantee you that's the number one most important thing. Taking care of your neighbor, taking care of those around you become the most important thing in the world. I learned this firsthand during the ice storm when we were all out of power. Within 24 hours of no power, people emerged from their home. It was like clockwork. The moment we didn't have the resources to be able to keep ourselves isolated, where electricity gave us toasters, refrigerators, stoves, hot water, heating. Remember, this is Canada, so we have very cold winters. And the temperature around the ice storm was fluctuating between -5 and +5, depending on the situation. That's why it's fluctuating around the freezing mark. So we were getting thick, dense rain that would flash freeze as soon as it hit branches and stuff like that. I discovered dozens and dozens of neighbors that I never even knew existed. You also quickly discover, in that context, who's out for the better of others and who isn't. I remember, for instance, people who would hoard, people who would loot, people who would try to damage and try to steal. Again, a temporary solution that serves the betterment of nobody on the long term. But I also remember my neighbor who helped an old woman walk up the street on the slippery roads. A guy who I'd never met before. I was, who the hell is that guy? He'd been living there for 15 years. I'd been living there for 15 years. Never saw the guy before in my life. Or the guy who owned the pizzeria up the street, Kent Pizzeria in NDG, Montreal. If it's still there, props to Kent Pizzeria, my neighborhood pizza joint that I love so much. He cooked pizzas on a Bunsen burner. It was a bit soggy, tasted great though, and lukewarm coffee on a hot plate, just so that people could have some warm food and some company, so people could hang out in a place and feel some semblance of normalcy. It was wonderful. It was a human experience that I'll never forget. I still remember sitting there in that pizzeria with my coat on, because it wasn't entirely warm in there, with him sitting in front of this, with all of his pizza ovens which were shut off, his dozens of pizza ovens which were all off, but this sad little pizza plate that he had. And we sat down and we chatted for a couple of hours, very patiently waiting for the single pizza to cook, drinking kind of crappy lukewarm coffee, but it was great. We depended on him. What do we depend on people for? We depend on people for physical help. If we're not as strong, we're not as capable, we're not as agile, we're not as flexible, we don't have as much endurance, we depend on people who do. If we're somebody who doesn't have the ability to speak or communicate their needs, maybe you just don't have the gift of the gab, you're not a good talker, you might need somebody who has the ability to communicate your needs better. Somebody who is a good listener, knows what it is you need, and can communicate that to the people who you need to communicate to. We need people to communicate. We need people to offer us emotional support. People who might be a little bit stronger in their head. Maybe they're not going through as rough a time as we are, so they have a little bit more extra emotional resource, just to be somebody who can listen, just because we need somebody to talk to. We need somebody to vent to. a good ear. One of my favorite people to talk to in the whole world, not all of them because some of them are assholes, are older people. People who have a lot of wisdom and a lot of patience and a lot of time. People who are retired. People who have a lot of compassion. People who have the experience, who've raised many children and have heard many sob stories and are really good at helping you get it out. That's one of the big reasons why I feel taking care of the elderly, the most vulnerable during COVID, is such an important thing, because they are, in my humble opinion, the wisdom and the soul of society, because they have experienced it all and they have the greatest access to that resource. Maybe not physically as much, but definitely emotionally. Another reason to mask up and be careful. We start to depend on people with special abilities, people with special professions. How valuable the hardware store became when the ice storm hit, when there was no power. People who had access to generators, people who had access to gas-powered things. We also depended on scientists to say, don't use that propane barbecue in your house. You will kill yourself. That's poison. Don't barbecue in your home. Don't use gas-powered things in your home. That will kill you. Do it out in your balcony in a well-ventilated area. We depended on strong people who could help to lift, to carry, to move, to transport. We depended on compassionate people. We depended on psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors, people with the expertise and a sense of responsibility who are there to help us manage ourselves emotionally. We depended on humor, one of the most taken for granted qualities a human being can have, a good sense of humor. I'd say that nowadays, my saviors aren't only compassionate and helpful people, but I really, really appreciate funny people. Bill Burr, Joe Rogan, George Carlin. Funny people. You just need a good laugh sometimes. You just need to be able to laugh, let it out. To me, laughter is as valuable as a good cry, a good healthy cry. It just reminds you of the positive side of the world. It's like hitting the reset button on your energy. To me, a good laugh is about, if you're feeling down, if you're feeling in the dumps, I strongly recommend doing a YouTube search for stand-up comedy. Listen to some David Chappelle. He will bring you right back to earth immediately. Comedians are, to me, the unsung heroes. It's such a valuable, valuable profession. From people who often live some pretty hard time lives. Comedy can be a very hard life. There's a reason why a lot of comedians are a bit rough around the edges. It's because you have to live a very, very challenging life emotionally sometimes in order to be able to communicate to other human beings in a way that really sticks. It really hits home. It really makes you feel, and it really helps you heal. What you might be feeling today, what you might be experiencing today, is pain plus time. And when you experience pain plus time, when you experience loneliness plus time, when you experience a lifestyle change that pulls you away, that is tying you up and restricting you from being able to grasp the things that you've become so dependent on over the years to find comfort and solace and some peace of mind, and you do that for an extended period of time, it exhausts you. And if it exhausts you to a point where you don't know if you can handle it anymore, you learn to change. Like that expression that I've said a million times that I love, the one from that movie with Keanu Reeves and John Cleese that I always forget. The Alien movie, you can remind me in the comments below, I always forget. I don't know why that movie title always eludes me, but John Cleese, when faced with a question from Keanu Reeves, who's playing an alien, why should I save a society that has done nothing to change despite all of these opportunities. Human species have been so destructive on the planet. Why should I save your species? And John Cleese says, it's not until we are on the brink that true change happens. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, you who's listening to me right now, you might be on that brink. So maybe it's time for you to take a good hard look at yourself and say, what matters most? What do I need to heal? What do I need to overcome this? Am I trying to grasp at already familiar means that aren't available? Am I still waiting for that knight in shining armor to come busting in through the door and sweep me away and take me off to the sunset? That knight in shining armor might not ever show up. You're learning right now that knight in shining armor is fiction. That knight in shining armor is never showing up. Now that reality's kicked in, what are you going to do now? It's not until you're on that brink and you make that realization when you're hypothetically, figuratively speaking, on the brink of life and death, either physically, emotionally, or whatever the case might be, that you make the truest decisions of your life. That you make the truest discoveries about what truly matters to you. Or maybe you can't. Maybe you just don't know. And maybe you are sitting there on a brink that might be permanent, where whatever decision you make next might be the end of you in one way or another, either the end of your life, the end of your emotional health, the end of your physical health. That whatever next thing can happen to you could be permanently scarring or damaging. That, my friend, is your body's way of saying you are not equipped to handle this situation. You do not possess the tools or the expertise to handle this situation. And that's when you reach out for help. That's when you reach out to a professional, not to an art teacher. You don't reach out to Adam. Adam's an art teacher. He's a YouTuber. He's not a doctor. You don't reach out to your friend who means you well. A friend can definitely get you through a hard time. They can be there to talk to you. But when you've spoken to your friends 1,000 times, when you've had 18 million Zoom calls, and maybe you even broke the rules and hung out with them at their house and gave them a big hug, I won't hold it against you if you do. Sometimes we just need to do that too. But what if you've done that and that's still not enough? That's when you learn to make a responsible decision and speak to a professional. That's when you do that. If all you needed was a hug from a friend, if all you needed was just to bitch to mom or dad that you were fed up of this shit and you were sick and tired of these goddamn fucking restrictions, and you got it out of your system, and you feel better, you had a good cry, and you feel better, then that's all you needed. You were just mentally exhausted, and you needed to turn that release valve and let off some steam, and you feel better. But if that's not enough, that's when you need to reach out for help. And what I want to tell you is that it's not your job, it's not your responsibility to have the answer. It's not your responsibility to be the only person solely responsible for the outcome of your life. You are not alone. You're not going through this on your own. You are a member of a race of biological organisms that are incredibly smart, that have the capacity for an incredible amount of empathy and compassion, that have an absolutely unimaginable level of healing ability, not only for themselves, but for others. And if you are taking that resource for granted because you think you got to do it all on your own, that's a foolish thought. It's a foolish belief. It means that somewhere along the lines you came up with this fictional understanding that you had to do everything on your own. And what I'm telling you today is, don't. The first 15 people you reach out to might be complete morons and might not help you out. They might even be professionals that suck ass, that brush you off or try to just, silence you with some one-word answer. But then there's going to be that 16th one that revolutionizes you, that saves your life and pulls you through. And what I'm telling you is, do it. If you're at that point in your life where you feel like you just don't have the resources to get through, if you're at your wit's end and you don't know what's going to... The outcome of your life moving forward from this point forward is unpredictable, then you are nowhere near the finish line. And that's what I learned in my life. I learned when I was going through my hardest times, but not just going through my hardest times. When I was going through my hardest times and I hit rock bottom. And then after I hit rock bottom, when I said, okay, that's it. I throw in the towel, hands up, you got me. I tap out. I'm tapping out. And Mother Nature said, tapping out? I'm just getting started. And I didn't only hit rock bottom, but I was dragged along that rough granite bedrock for another 5 years of my life with no end in sight. That I made the most valuable realizations. I made the most valuable discoveries of who I am. And I swear to you, right now listening to me, I would not be a fraction of the man I am today. I would not be a fraction of the human being I was today if I hadn't had my life dragged on the hard rocks for longer than I ever thought I could endure. I learned to embrace that. I learned to make it a part of who I was. I didn't deny the pain. I didn't run from the pain. I realized that pain sometimes is life. I just finished watching for the 50th time the documentary with Kitty Hart. If you're not familiar with Kitty Hart, she was a 16-year-old girl who ended up in Auschwitz-Birkenau in Germany during the Second World War, the death camp, the concentration camp. And she described what she lived through. She lived through years, I think it was 4 years or something like that, of the most unimaginable torture you could possibly imagine. I can't even begin to describe it. Every single imaginable fabric of her being, from a humanitarian perspective, was destroyed. And the only single iota of a thing she had left was her will to live. That sometimes she barely had herself. Her mother pulled her through. Her friends pulled her through the roughest times. She dealt with typhoid for months. She was beaten and abused and frozen and sick and humiliated and diseased for years. She looked at the faces of people who had lost their life emotionally. They lost their souls. People who she could see in their eyes had given up on life altogether. They were broken. She saw that every single day. And she describes what she saw, what she experienced, how she had to give her friends up for death, how she had to hide under the dead bodies of diseased people who had died the night before from the SS guards who were gathering them up to gas them. I mean, if you think we're going through something rough now, try going through what you're going through right now while freezing to death, starving to death, being beaten to death, listening to suffering and death every single day. And then there she was in a documentary years later, and then many years later, an older lady with gray hair revisiting Auschwitz again later on, still with the scars of her past. But a woman who's as sharp and as stubborn and as witty and as funny as she was when she was a 16-year-old woman on the brink of death. And there she is, decades later, a long life later, with children and a husband, all grown up themselves, still telling her story. She walked that line. And what this teaches you is, you might feel you're at your wit's end. You might feel exhausted and defeated. You might feel like you don't know how much longer you can manage this. And what I'm telling you is, don't you dare take yourself for granted. Don't you dare take yourself for granted for 2 seconds. Because your soul, your spirit, your survival instinct, your wisdom, even if you're young, you don't have to be 95 years old, even if you're 13, even if you're 11, even if you're 8, your ability to survive, your ability to manage, your ability to adapt, the more you test it, the harder you push it, the more you realize just how remarkable you are. But don't ever take for granted not only your own worth and your own abilities, but don't take for granted the worth of others and how much you depend on them. So my advice, if I'm going to give you any advice today, it is to not only base your decisions moving forward for your own health, on your own health, but base those decisions on the health of your neighbors, your community, and to people who you might not ever meet. That 75, 85-year-old man or woman who has a lifetime of experience, who might have even lived through the Second World War, who might have lived through the Spanish flu, who might have lived through the Vietnam War, who might have lived through the Great Depression. Because you depend on them and their wisdom and their strength and their compassion and their empathy and their patience. You need them to teach you as well how to cope when all else seems lost. So whatever decision you make moving forward is not only for your own betterment, but it's for the betterment of them as well. For those invisible ladies and gentlemen out there who you are wearing a mask for, who you are disinfecting your hands for, who you are vaccinating yourself for. Because wouldn't it be a tragedy if a woman like Kitty Hart, who survived the greatest inhumanities of all time, dropped dead of the coronavirus because somebody decided not to wear a mask, or somebody decided not to disinfect their hands, or, let's call it like it is, decided not to vaccinate themselves? Or somebody's loving mother who raised 5 kids dropped dead of the coronavirus, not of natural causes, but because somebody decided to throw a party and screw the rules for a day. Is it really worth it? Is it really worth it? No, it's not worth it, because you need her as much as she needs you. And you might not realize that because you haven't been around as long as she has. You don't know what she knows. You don't know what your grandfather knows. The next thing that I want to share is a lesson that objectively took over 20 years for me to learn. And it comes in the form of a comparison between my past and my present. Back in '99, when that ice storm hit that knocked out the power for weeks or months, depending on where you lived, one of the things I've described in the past is how much is lost when a single resource is turned off, electricity. Think about what in your immediate room, in your space, does not completely rely on electricity, including the video you're listening to right now, the internet that's running, the electricity that's powering your house, the lighting, the heating, your refrigerator, your stove, your hot water. Everything is powered by electricity. Electricity was the key to unlocking modern society. And when you turn that off, you're brought right back to the days of Red Dead Redemption, when you don't have a light bulb and you have to use candlelight to light your room. Flashlights and batteries die very quickly. They don't last a very long time. You don't have music to keep you busy unless you play your own music, unless you have an acoustic instrument. If you have an electric one, forget it. But we had each other. And we had the resource of other humans, of other people to walk us through, to get us through hard times, to protect us, to look out for us. And I'm not talking about, helping your family or your close friends. I'm talking about strangers helping strangers, as I described before. People knocking on people's doors, making sure that everybody was safe in it. If there was no answer, walking in and making sure there was nobody in a bad situation. People helping other people with their groceries, helping them up the street, helping them carry heavy things, making sure that they're safe. People were helping people. We also realized the power and the meaning behind putting your hand on somebody's shoulder, giving somebody a back rub, smiling at somebody, shaking somebody's hand, putting your arms around somebody, giving somebody a hug, physical contact, looking at somebody in the eyes and seeing them smile, cracking a joke, sharing in the story. Those things became immediately important. Now fast forward to 2021 when I'm recording this video, and we're in exactly the opposite situation, aren't we? Because we have access to innumerable, if I can use a fancy word, innumerable resources. We can go to any store we want. Most stores are open during limited hours, at least the necessities. Restaurants and things like that might be at limited function, but some of them are still functioning. But even if we don't go to these stores, even if we decide to stay at home, we can order anything we want online. We can get pre-prepared meals delivered to us every day. We can order all of our household needs. We can do anything we want. We can get anything we want. But we have access to any resource we have, except for one: people. At least not in the way that people might need right now. And what we're doing as a result is we can't, before, back during the ice storm, we couldn't rely on our resources, so we relied on people. So what we're doing today is the opposite. We can't rely on people as much as we could before, because the whole point of it is we have to stay away from each other. But we can rely on our resources. So this is why listening to YouTube videos like this have become such an important staple to keep us sane through all this time. But we can't smile at the person at the grocery store because we have to wear a mask. We can't shake somebody's hand or give somebody a hug because they look like they've had a hard day, because we're going to spread a virus. We can't walk into somebody's house and ask them if they need help with the groceries or check up on them, because we could be spreading a virus into the home and causing more danger than good. And you have to ask yourself, if I was to do a Survivor Man, a Les Shroud Survivor Man, pick 2 tools out of the Survivor kit that you need, which one would you pick? People or resources? Which one would you pick? Which one is more essential to your survival? I think on the short term, resources would be more valuable, right? Having access to general resources and stuff like that. On the long term, I think we could figure out how to make our own fire. I think we could figure out how to hunt our own food. I think we could figure out how to gather if we live in a warm climate. But nothing replaces people. Nothing replaces humanity. And being isolated from other people for long enough, and I'm not talking about seeing people online, I'm talking about face-to-face. I think, thank God we have things like Skype or Zoom that are allowing us to share our feelings and talk with our friends. But there's a very big difference between talking to somebody through a screen, as I'm sure you know, and seeing somebody face to face. To touch them, to feel them, to smell them, to feel their energy is a very different experience, and one that we're realizing now after a year and a half of this is a real thing. It's not fictional. We can't live virtually for the rest of our lives. And we need the physicality of others, the energy exchange between different people. And this is where I feel people are suffering the most. I think this is one of the reasons why people are having the hardest time. So what this should be doing, as it did back during the ice storm, what this should be doing is teaching the value of something. because I think there's a bit of a blessing to all of this. One of my biggest frustrations has been watching how social media has made us more alienated. How you can see people, the whole family people sitting inside their own house, and the boys playing video games and the girls on TikTok and the other girls watching YouTube videos, and dad's watching his YouTube videos and mom's watching her YouTube videos, and everybody's in their own little world. It's basically, it's homes full of strangers. And what's happening now is this pandemic has actually reinforced that bad behavior, at least until now. Because now I'm getting emails and messages from friends and loved ones saying, I'm really having a hard time coping. I'm getting messages from people saying, you only have to say the word cry and I'll bawl out in tears because I'm always on the brink of losing it. Why? You've just spent the last 8 hours on Zoom with your girlfriend. You've just spent the last 9 hours chatting with your mom on Skype or on the phone or on a FaceTime call. Why are you depressed? It's because you're starting to realize that people are real things, not virtual things, and that we need to physically be there for other people. Maybe now you might be starting to learn why human beings shake each other's hand. Why do we give each other handshakes when we meet them? Because what it's doing is touching another human being. It's making an emotional, spiritual connection with another human being by touching each other. Showing your trust, showing an open, unthreatening palm to another person. Communicating your intentions through how tightly or how gently or how comfortingly you grip that other person's hand. It's a way of communicating with another person in a physical way. It's a very valuable form of communication. You start to realize the value of being able to look at a complete stranger and smiling and say, my God, you look beautiful today. That you're not just communicating this through your eyes, but you're communicating it with your smile too. There's value in that, isn't there? Because we can't do that now. We got a mask on. So may this period of human famine, this starvation, this feeling of claustrophobia from being alienated from the people you love in a very physical sense, may this be a lesson to you in the value of human beings, the value of others, the value of kindness. It's a lesson. And it's a lesson that can't be taught by some inspiring, poetic YouTube video. It's a lesson that's learned from suffering. It's a lesson that's learned from starvation. It's a lesson that's learned from being in what we are right now, which is a survival situation. I don't want you to ever forget or ignore or run away from what you're feeling right now. I want this lesson to continue. I want this experience to serve you as a reason to be kind, a reason to value things like empathy and compassion and patience and kindness. Because that's exactly what we're missing right now. So remember, take care of yourselves. Have faith in yourselves. Have compassion for yourselves. Realize that you are far more capable than you might think. Realize that you need your neighbors desperately to get you through the hard times, especially when the smoke starts to clear, when the going gets tough. You will need them and they will need you. So you need to take care of yourself. You need to keep yourself healthy, and you need to keep your neighbors healthy so that everybody can survive and everybody can thrive moving forward. So we can look back at what we're experiencing today as a very, very valuable, very freaking hard lesson we had to deal with. Okay? And with that said, I love you all with all my heart. And take care. you.